The amount of dollars generated through youth sports is almost double that of the NFL. When we
Wow.
started doing the research for our book, the youth sports industry, involved around $18 million, and now it's grown to about 40, and it's just continues to grow. And these entrepreneurs see the potential to make money off youth sports, so they're pushing hard to get parents to spend money on sports, and not all families have the resources to do that. So it's kind of exacerbated inequalities in our society. Parents who have a lot of money can pay for their kids to go to a private coach or play for an elite, pay-to-play team, and so it's expanding the gap, which is really sad. And we would like more to have multiple options.
Welcome to the latest edition of Adeptus On-Air, and today we have another great guest in Chris Bjork, who is a professor of education at Vassar College and also heavily involved in youth sports education. Chris, thanks for joining the show.
My pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
Likewise, likewise. So, just to get started, tell us about your upbringing and how that eventually led you into the world of education.
Sure. So I grew up, in the 70s and 80s in California, and I was always active in sports. And at that time, playing sports meant signing up for Little League or AYSO or playing for your school team. And that was kind of it. And then I moved back to New York and started teaching at Vassar. And when my kids were young, I signed them up for sports thinking that their experience would be similar to mine, and discovered very quickly that things had changed dramatically and that the whole world of youth sports has gotten really commercialized and profit driven, and kids were under pressure when they were 8 or 9 years old to play for travel teams. So I talked with my colleague Bill Hoynes, and he was having similar experiences. And we found that it's really hard for parents to get accurate information. Almost everything you see in the media presents these extreme views, either that sport is ruining our kids' lives, or they point to these examples of extreme success. And most families are kind of in the middle. And so we wanted to write a book that gave them the information that they would need to make wise choices for their kids.
That's awesome. And just if you can elaborate, your book's called More Than Just a Game, if I'm not
Right.
mistaken.
You're right.
Obviously,
It's more than a game, how the youth sports industry is changing the way we parent and what to do about it.
that's awesome. And if you can elaborate the contents in the book, and I know you told us the origin story of how it came to be, but what can our audience look forward to, buying the book and reading the book?
Sure. So the book, Bill Hoynes, my co-author, and I have written a lot of stuff that was academic, and we really wanted this book to be geared towards your everyday parent and to give them a balanced view of what is involved in parenting a young athlete today. So we spent 2 years following 4 travel teams intensively, and we went to the practices and tournaments and interviewed the parents and coaches and players. And then after that, we spent about 6 years interviewing parents and coaches all over the country. And on top of that, college coaches, to get their views on things and to help uh, parents understand kind of what youth sports looks like from the broad perspective. Because I found when my kids were little, when you're in the middle of it, it's so hard to make decisions because you're so emotionally invested and you want to do whatever you can to help your kid make it. But we wanted to just step back and kind of look at things less passionately to give them an idea of what they're facing now and what's down the line.
Wow, that's awesome. And in your interviews with and following the teams and your interviews with, all these parents and coaches, what are some tentpole takeaways, maybe two or three takeaways that you took that, kind of impact the whole landscape? They weren't just standalone, but you heard similar themes over and over again.
I would say the number one takeaway is that parents today feel this intense pressure to do whatever they can to make their kids special, to give them a competitive edge. And that translates into getting into the most competitive, highly ranked, high visible sports program they can when they're little. And what we learned is that's not true at all, that kids develop at different rates. their interests are going to shift, and there's no reason to get them to specialize and go all in one sport when they're still in elementary school, that it really pays off physically and mentally to delay that specialization as long as possible. And then the other takeaway I would say is there's real benefit to encouraging your children to participate in all different activities, to play different sports, to be act in plays in school, to get involved in student government, and to create balance in their lives so that they have many options.
And how much? Because as a parent, and from what I see some things, missteps there as well. How much did you see parents maybe overstepping or kind of pushing harder than they should, or things like that? What can parents do better? I guess as far as what you've seen out there in the landscape, what can parents do better in that?
Well, I would say the main message to parents is to kind of uh, pay attention to the fact that it's not all about you. To try not to live vicariously through your kids, but to make decisions based on what's best for them. Because what we see is parents feel this need to go all in because their ego is so tightly connected to how their kids do in sport, and that's not a healthy situation. So it's really helpful to talk to your kids, ask them what they want to do, and let them know it's okay not to spend every waking hour, practicing a sport, and that it's also okay if they want to step back and take a breather.
Yeah, good point, good point. And kind of in a similar vein, but I was going to ask you. You touched on it a little bit. How do you properly balance the amount of time in competitive sports and just allowing them to be a kid, allowing them to, play at the park with their friends, play video games, go get ice cream, stuff like that. How do you, it's a constant battle, constant kind of tightrope that you walk with that.
Right. And that's something that was new to me because when I was a kid, that was the standard. We would play one sport for a couple of months and then shift to something else. We would ride our bikes to practice. I don't remember ever traveling hours to play in a game, but that's become the norm. So I would say try and structure your children's lives so that they have downtime and that they aren't spending, entire weekends throughout the year playing one single sport, and to make an effort to give them also breaks throughout the year. Because what we found is a lot of parents now sign their kids to play up for these travel teams to specialize in a single sport and play that sport all year round with no breaks when they're 8 or 9 years old. And all the doctors we spoke with, all the psychologists we spoke to said that's not a good situation for kids. That you want to build in breaks in their weekly schedules and also breaks throughout the year so that they can just kind of decompress, step back, and then we find that when they have those breaks, they return to that sport with enthusiasm.
Interesting, interesting. And you mentioned doctors. I would assume as far as physical, physical ailments and things like that. What did you find in that respect? Could kids be overworked? Some parents think, oh, they're kids. They run around all day, and it's hard to overwork them or overtrain them.
Right. And we found there's strong evidence to suggest that it's really not good for kids' bodies to play a single sport 10, 12 months a year when they're, still in elementary school, that their muscles need time to develop. It's really healthy to exercise different parts of their bodies. And there's this real increase in all sorts of injuries to knees, shoulders, elbows, ankles, because they're overusing those parts of their bodies. We also talked to physical therapists who noticed that there's been a real surge in injuries, especially arm injuries, to high school athletes because they're not taking those breaks. So if you're a baseball pitcher and you're pitching 100 pitches a week, 365 days a year, that's going to have consequences. And everyone said, wait till kids develop. And then I would just add that there's a mental aspect of this. If a kid is specializing in a sport and spending all of their time outside of school playing basketball or volleyball, whatever it is, that creates a tremendous amount of pressure on them. And for some kids, that's really difficult to negotiate, especially when they're 10, 11 years old.
Wow, wow. No, it's all interesting, really good information. I have a question. This is a personal question because I'm going through this right now, and I don't know if you can answer it. I don't know, if you study this at all, but my son wants he's 8 years old, and because dad goes to the gym, he wants to go to the gym and lift weights and things like that. And in my mind, I'm like, I want to wait till your muscles develop a little bit more before start weightlifting, weight training and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't have any reason for that. I don't have any science behind that. I don't even know if it's true. So I'm asking someone that's studied the field, if you know anything about that, as far as like, a young kid wanting to lift weights, is that good or bad when their muscles are still, he's 8 years old?
There's no reason for an 8-year-old to be lifting weights. It's just not necessary. I can see how they'd want to spend time with you, and that's great. Take your son to the gym with you, take him around, make him feel included. But I would really avoid any stress on the joints. And that brings up another point: is that sometimes it's hard for parents to talk about these issues with their kids and to advise them how to organize their time. And pediatricians are a great resource. That's the family doctor is someone who can have these conversations with the parent and kid, and that takes the pressure off the parent because the pediatrician is most likely going to say, Joey or whatever you're saying, it's probably not good for your body to be lifting weights, but you might want to do this. And I can almost guarantee that pediatrician is going to suggest spending lots of time playing on the street and also engaging in low impact kind of recreational sports until their bodies develop.
Got it. Got it. Okay. No, that's relieving because that was my instinct, my inclination, and I was say, oh, just get on the treadmill or something like that. He wants to go to the weights because dad's with the weights,
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's good. Okay. Here's a scary scenario for most parents. Kids put in 5, 6, 7 years of their childhood into, and parents too, in terms of, everything. And then one morning they're 12, 13, 14 years old and they just wake up and say, you know what, mom, dad, I don't want to do it anymore. Um, how should a parent handle that situation, which probably happens to many kids, at some point in their upbringing?
Absolutely. That's so common today. And that gets back to my point of the value of having kids participate in multiple activities, multiple sports. So if, a kid is playing basketball for 6 months of the year, taking a couple months off, and then swimming for a few months, if they decide that they don't want to be all in with basketball, they have options. If a kid's life revolves around one sport from the time they're young, it's really hard to step away from that. And we've seen lots of evidence that kids whose identities are all wrapped in one sport struggle when they get into adolescence because they may decide they're not so interested in that sport after all. It may be out of their hands. They may get cut from a team or they may get injured. And it's good to prepare for that. I would also add we interviewed a bunch of college athletes about this, and we asked them about what it was like to stop playing a sport. And every single one of them that we interviewed said that they got a lot out of sports, but there was a certain point in their lives when they decided, they had enough playing soccer or hockey, whatever it may be, and they wanted to move on and try different things. And they were totally comfortable letting go of that part of their lives and moving on to other things. They valued what they got out of sports, but it didn't anchor their lives. And one other really important thing to keep in mind is that because of this emphasis on travel sports, a lot of for a lot of kids and especially their parents, the ultimate goal quickly becomes getting a college scholarship. They think since they're playing on a travel team that's setting them up for a scholarship to play at UCLA or University of Michigan. But the reality is only about 1% of all high school athletes get that scholarship. And so it's good to just look forward and think that's not the ultimate sign of success, being happy and developing physically.
Yeah, wow, 1%. That's it. If if I'm looking at parents around there, they probably think that number is way higher, and they probably think everyone thinks their kid has a chance. So yeah, that's a good point. How big is the youth sports business these days? The business of it, how big is it?
It's huge. So to put it in perspective, the amount of dollars generated through youth sports is almost double that of the NFL. When we
Wow,
started doing the research for our book, the youth sports industry, involved around 18 um, $1 million, and now it's grown to about 40, and it's just continues to grow. And these entrepreneurs see the potential to make money off youth sports, so they're pushing hard to get parents to spend money on sports, and not all families have the resources to do that. So what's happened is, I'm sorry, 40 billion, not million dollars, industry. So um, it's kind of exacerbated inequalities in our society. Parents who have a lot of money can pay for their kids to go to a private coach or play for an elite, pay to play team, and parents who don't have so much money have limited options, and so it's expanding this gap, which is really sad. And we would like more kids to have multiple options.
yeah. In terms of reform, if there was any one or two things you would change in terms of youth sports reform, as a system, what would that be?
I would say to get the big money out of these clubs, and in terms of how parents can do that, to try and get involved in local recreational leagues or little leagues, things like that, so that their kids can get involved in sports without having to fork out big dollars. So to try and give local recreational leagues more support, and to give parents more options without having to commit to. We talk to parents who are spending 20, $30,000 a year on a child in sports, and that's kind of scary, I'd say.
Wow. And Chris, your role at Vassar College in New York, correct?
That's right.
Yes. Tell us more. Tell us more about your day to day, role and presence there.
So I teach in the education department here, and I work with college students who are planning to become teachers. And it's interesting. I see a lot of similarities and crossover between what's going on in schools today and what's going on in sports. Obviously, not as much money in it is involved, but our schools have become so performance obsessed and test driven that for a lot of kids, the joy of learning has disappeared. And I would say in sports, that's the case too. When it becomes this highly pressurized system, kids lose their love for playing a sport because they feel this intense need to do better than other kids rather than to play alongside them.
Yeah, no, good point. Good point. And same question I asked about youth sports reform. Since you're in the education field as well, what are your thoughts on education reform, particularly at the K through 12? To get to university, obviously, what can be done to really help our school system?
Right. I think that the biggest concern I have relates to standardized testing and all of the time that kids spend in schools today getting ready to take tests, drilling, getting tutors, all so that they'll perform well on tests, and that's really distorted the system. When I was an elementary teacher for 9 years, and my goal was to obviously help kids get strong academic skills, make them enjoy learning, and that's hard to do when all that the teacher is focused on is getting them ready for a standardized test, and that's something that I think parents can alleviate. Though they can let their kids know they do on a test isn't as important as kind of their ability to investigate what's interesting to them and to develop as an individual.
Well said. Well said. And any particular goals you have over the next, say, 2 to 4 years? Maybe another book, another what do you have coming up down the pipe?
Well, my co-author Bill Hoynes and I have been doing a lot of interviews and podcasts and shows to promote this book because we think it's so important for parents to get this information. We want to get the book out to people so that we can help them make decisions for their kids. I've also started on a new book that actually looks at the lives of beginning teachers. So I spent a year following 8 brand new teachers during their first year in the classroom and tracing how their thinking about teaching evolved over the year. And I'm writing that book right now.
Wow, that's awesome. I really like your approach to spend time with, youth teams or teachers and everything, and to get that perspective through their eyes. And it's, and it's well thought out because it takes a long time just to research before you even write your first words. So that's pretty impressive. What are your social channels, Chris, so our audience know where can our audience find the book? Where can they find your?
So the book is published through Central Recovery Press, but the way to get their hands on it is it's all on Amazon these days. And so the book again is more than a game, more than just a game, how the youth sports industry is changing the way we parent and what to do about it. We went with a publisher that would put it out fairly cheaply, so it's less than $20, easy to get. And I tweet regularly or X regularly. I don't know what the verb is these days. Anyway, my account on there is at York6, CHRISBJRK, the number 6.
Excellent, Chris, and thanks again for sharing your immense insight and information on the book and youth sports and just education in general. And just thanks overall for joining Adeptus On Air. Thanks for listening to Adeptus On Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.